There are a whole host of ethical challenges that one might encounter in your career, in your jobs, in your daily lives. Discrimination, fraud, theft, embezzlement, lying, cheating, all number of things. And these are the things that actually make it to the headlines. And the headlines are pretty dramatic in its exposition of ethical failings at the most senior levels of organizations. However, I contend that integrity is an ethical behavior goes beyond that, and it actually manifests itself in the day-to-day activities that we all do, and that is the whole notion of how we make decisions. And in fact, if we are intellectually honest and we have the intellectual integrity to actually make the right decisions. And what I want to do now is talk to you about the ethical notion of cognitive bias and how cognitive bias can get in the way of good decision making, and in fact is probably the most common ethical challenge that we would face on a day-to-day basis.
Cognitive bias is this idea that we are not perfectly rational actors. We use shortcuts to make decisions. We rely on past experiences and ideas, and we may do so and we may not even realize that those ideas or those experiences are now out of date. We have to guard against a whole set of cognitive biases, and we'll talk about several of them. But first I want to introduce the idea of the normalization of deviance. Now, Diane Vaughan developed this idea when she evaluated and analyzed the tragedy of the Challenger launch that happened in the 80s. Yes, there was a technical cause to that disaster. That technical cause was, quote, eroded O-rings. But Vaughan argues that the roots lie not just in that technical problem. In fact, somebody allowed eroded O-rings to occur. The roots of the disaster actually are a result of a set of behaviors
that she called the normalization of deviance.
In short, people in organizations become accustomed to their own set of biases and their own processes and procedures, which may in fact deviate from what might be considered normal or good practices. They become so involved and invested in those, quote, culturally accepted norms of behavior, which may in fact be deviant from the norm, that they in fact no longer consider them deviate from the norm. They don't recognize that their biases do exist. And this she articulated very well in a book called Challenger, the Launch Decision, and she does a really good job of going in and demonstrating all the cognitive biases that basically set up the Challenger disaster long before it even left the launching pad and the O-rings even began to get eroded. So let's talk about several biases that do exist. The first is the idea of sunk cost. And sunk cost is all about throwing good money after bad. It's an escalating commitment based on a prior investment. So it's a bias to continue an activity, a course of action, an investment based not on its returns, but based on the amount of time and money already invested and already poured into the project. So I don't want to abandon this particular project because I've already put so much time into it that that time would be wasted. Well, the fact of the matter is we shouldn't make decisions, future decisions, based on past acts and past investments. Next is overconfidence, and if you don't recognize this picture, this is George Armstrong Custer of Little Bighorn fame, where in fact he was so confident in his abilities that he felt that he could not be defeated. And in fact, overconfidence is the fact that your subjective confidence in your judgment is not supported by the objective data. And in fact, the objective data in Armstrong's case was that he was greatly outnumbered. The recency effect. Now, the recency effect is the whole idea that the most recent set of data will influence your decision. So here is snowfall in Boulder in 2012. And 33 inches of snow fell in the month of December 2012. And that led me to the conclusion that, in fact, it always snows a lot in Boulder in December. Well, I based that on essentially the snowfall. That should be 2011, excuse me, not 2012. So the snowfall in 2012, based on the snowfall in 2011, should be quite high, almost 3 feet. Well, in fact, the average snowfall in Boulder is 13 inches in December, not 33. So I shouldn't expect that the 2011 snowfall is an indicator of what the 2012 snowfall should be. The average is closer to 13, much less than what the most recent experience is that I had. And then there's a confirmation bias, and that is looking for data that supports your own point of view. And here again, going back to it always snows a lot in December, here is a picture of snowfall in December that confirms my preconceived notion that it snows a lot in December in Boulder. And here's a picture of my front yard, and you can see proof that it does in fact do that, when in fact, again, the average snowfall in Boulder in December is 13 inches. Then there is the notion of the anchoring effect. And the anchoring effect is basically that the first data that is presented forms the basis of all other judgments and estimations that go from that point. So we see this a lot in real estate. So let's say you have a house that's worth $250,000. Well, it gets put on the market not for $250,000, but for $300,000. And the anchoring bias of that $300,000 may cause the actual selling price to be $270,000, $20,000 more than it's actually worth. But because the number of $300,000 was put up there, that is the point of departure at which all other bids were issued. So anchoring bias, again, is giving undue importance to the first data points that you come across. And then there's the notion of illusory correlation. And this is the concept that coincident correlation, two things that might move together coincidentally, does not actually have a cause and effect relationship. So here's a perfect example. The x-axis is the fresh lemons imported to the U.S. from Mexico, and you can see that has a direct correlation to U.S. highway fatalities. Or the more lemons that are imported from Mexico, the fewer U.S. highway fatalities there are. Answer is, let's import more lemons from Mexico, and we'll have fewer deaths on the highway. Well, in fact, there is no cause and effect there. They just happen to be coincident data points that the only relationship is correlative, not causal. And then finally, there's egocentrism. And this is essentially that it's all about you, that you confuse, or anyone confuses, their own opinions with fact. Here is a perfect example from everyone's favorite office situation in Dilbert. So there you have it. There are the things that can in fact get in the way of good decision making. And we'll end that discussion here.